All right, apologies for the delay. The TV was not behaving today. Let's talk a little bit about housekeeping. What I decided to do for your first weekly meeting minute submission is I decided, you know what, let's put it off since I'm not going to be here next Wednesday anyways. So we're going to put it off a week. So I'm not going to have you submit your first minute submission until January 30th. Okay. Now it'll be due at 8 a.m. Okay. Today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what should go in them. Now, let me say this. I know some of you are going to be like, well, do you have a template? Do you have a preferred method or what it should look like? And the answer is no. I'm going to show you what I want to see in it, and then you all can put together whatever you want. This is really your team's way of organizing business on your own. So however you choose to do that is completely fine. But we'll get to that here in a second. So one thing I will mention is I did, again, a little bit more work to Blackboard. I have uploaded some sample meeting minutes and timekeeping and whatnot, and I'll pull that up here in a second. I also updated the link to download MathCAD. It should be a little more straightforward. Again, the way that MathCAD works, since all you need is MathCAD Express, what's going to happen is you're going to install MathCAD, and what will probably happen is it will say, okay, you have this version for 30 days. Okay. Well, the way MathCAD works is you'll have the full version for 30 days, and then afterwards it reverts to just the Express version. But as civil engineers, I honestly don't think you'll need anything more than the Express version. I mean, you're not doing any Bessel functions or differential equation solving and whatnot. And one of the things about civil engineering and about MathCAD Express is I genuinely think you'll find value in MathCAD Express from here on out. And when I say from here on out, I mean for a while, because it's an incredibly simple program and it can be used to present engineering calculations very neatly. It's very easy to understand, and it does a lot of the grunt work for you. And I'll show you a couple things related to, so for instance, some things related to concrete design that's relevant, some things related to just some basic computations, some things with units and whatnot, just so everybody is aware. Again, class is canceled on Wednesday, so after today, we're not going to meet again until the following Friday. And the following Friday, basically what we're going to do in class is we are going to start Bridge Engineering 101. We're going to talk about bridges. I'm going to talk about section properties, about dead loads on bridges, what's the difference between DC1 and DC2. We're going to talk about live load distribution. We're going to talk about applying some of that influence line stuff that you did in structural analysis ultimately to generate moment and shear envelopes. We're going to talk about the spec. We're going to, you all are going to know bridge engineering probably better than many of your peers, civil engineering graduates across the country, because I think it's really important for you all to have a somewhat marketable skill when you get out of here. You all are going to know the real deal, or at least enough of it to be proficient. Okay, sound good? All right, so this is going to be a somewhat short lecture. I don't think there's going to be too much time. I want to talk first off about the minutes, about weekly meeting minutes and whatnot. So when it comes to weekly minutes, so like I said, the first submission is going to be on January 30th, and ultimately every week I want to see an update on your progress. Now, I'm asking that you include a letter of transmittal at the beginning, and this can be super straightforward. You go have your letterhead and your company name and all that written by your project manager, and you can just say, Dr. Michelson, please see attached meeting minutes and correspondence from this week, just to keep it simple. The letter is pretty straightforward, but what goes into the meeting minutes I think takes a little bit of effort. So let me go to Blackboard. So here's the Blackboard page, and I'm in course materials. In terms of reporting guidelines, instead of putting together one big set of lecture notes and whatnot, I posted a couple of examples. Now, if you look at the examples, the first thing you're going to think is it looks like it's some redacted document from the FBI or something, because there's all these redactions. But the reason why is because these were actually reports submitted in senior design. I wanted to remove the names just for the sake of confidentiality. I've got two examples here that I think both do a fairly decent job in telling me what I need to know about your progress from week to week. Some of them are a little bit more detailed than others, and it just depends on the project and it depends on the week. You are going to have weekly meeting minutes, probably near the beginning where it's we met, we assigned some tasks, and then that's it. And there's not really going to be much to it. And then there are going to be weeks where you're grunting stuff out, and the reports and the minutes are going to be a lot longer. I don't really want you to, I know it's, you're college students, so you're going to think of this as an assignment. I really don't want you to think of, meeting minute submissions as an assignment. It's not like I'm trying to get you to do extra work. That's not really what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do is force you to document the work that you're already doing. Okay? This is forcing you to take notes, forcing you to record what it is that you're working on, forcing you to keep track of your own progress. It's not for me, it's for you. Okay? So this is a sample of a progress report from a course that we taught in 2015. I think this is probably on the upper echelon of what I need. Like, it's very detailed, like they even threw in tables of contents. Honestly, that's probably a bit much, but I'll say this is sort of the upper bar. Like, don't go beyond this. I think this was a bit much. What I think this that this report does very well is right off the bat, they delineate, okay, what it is that they completed in the previous week and what it is that they did in the proposed week. And they summarize this very concisely. One thing I will mention is this team chose to organize their reports and their work in this fashion because that's what worked for this team. When I show you the progress report from team number 2, which was from a couple years later, the progress report itself is going to look entirely different. It's going to be arranged entirely differently, and it's all about how this particular team decided to organize their work. So it's all sort of up to you. But what you can see in this progress report is this is from a team-by-team basis. They're looking at, okay, here's the work that we completed in this week. Here's the work that's being proposed for the following week. And you can see they broke it down into some pretty detailed tasks. So for instance, proposed work for the following week. Format and finalize the PowerPoint for the preliminary design presentation, prepare and practice for the verbal presentation, start a financial feasibility study, like researching material prices, availability, and dimensions of both steel and concrete components, research material transportation limitations, determine the design order on all the structural components for the project. I mean, it's pretty detailed. And that was sort of, that helped them out. I mean, I've been teaching this this course for a while now, and this team did a really good job of organizing themselves. They were probably one of the better teams that I've seen since I've been here that did a good job of making sure that they were keeping track of their own deadlines. If you recall, at the very beginning of this semester, one of the things I said is, yeah, there's some deadlines that I set, but one of the challenges you'll find is keeping track of and meeting the deadlines that you set. Okay. So the deadlines that you set for this member in your group, and you set for this member in your group, and that they set for you, et cetera. Because I think it's a little easier. It's week 3, and it's okay. Do I turn in Dr. Mike's homework on Monday, or do I do this senior design thing? It's like you kind of need to do both. And so I understand the temptation. Well, Dr. Mike's taking up the homework on Monday. This I could put off till Tuesday. Well, you keep doing that over 6-7 weeks. Next thing you know, the alternatives report's due tomorrow, and you got to start chugging them monsters because it's going to be one heck of a night. So it's almost like you're like, we know you're saying this, Dr. Mike, but it's still going to happen. I warned you. That's all I'll say. I warned you. The funny thing is, though, every single time I ask a student who's been through this process, like, what would you do differently? They're like, get started early, do stuff earlier, don't procrastinate, don't procrastinate. One thing I do want to see is this. Okay, this is a summary of the hours worked. I want to see this breakdown for each of your team members each week. Okay. Now, in this particular project, for this particular phase, they were doing quite a bit at this time. One of the things that to be honest, I'm sort of debating whether or not I want to see this in the report. And I think I'm ultimately, now that I think about it, I'm going to say no. In their timesheets, what you see here are a series of timesheets for each of the 5 team members. And one of the things that they list as a task and time completed was class. Like they say, well, I was in class for an hour and 15 minutes. That was an hour and 15 minutes I worked on the project. I don't want to see that because you're here anyways. I want to see the time that you spent outside of class on the project, because I know everybody, for all I know, everybody is here in class. So, I mean, I don't really need to see that. One other thing, I don't want in any way, shape, or form for you to think that you really need to embellish week from week. I want to see honestly what you're working on. I mean, I've got team members on this project. This was in 1 week. I have one team member put 10 hours in on the project, and I have one team member that put in 3 hours on the project. Okay? This group did great, okay? And they all contributed. It wasn't as if one team member did everything and the other team members didn't do anything. That wasn't really the case. The way that this particular project worked out and the way that this group decided to divvy up the work, spoiler alert, this was a bridge project as well, but there was a little bit more going on. This group did pier design, they did abutment design, and what have you. And so, like, for instance, this team member that didn't have much in week 4, well, this team member was responsible for the pier design. Once the superstructure was done, this team member took over. So if you look at these same reports in, say, week 9, everybody else has 4 or 5 hours, and this person has 10. So it divvied up accordingly, and this group did fantastic as a result. I do think that this group was hyper detailed on everything that they did. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I probably wouldn't go beyond what this group is doing. Let's see. They also actually put in meeting minutes from each of their weeks. So that first page was sort of, okay, here's a breakdown of everything that we did. We said we were going to do. Here's a breakdown of everything we need to do. They also included meeting minutes. Okay, so these are the minutes that they took from each meeting. And it didn't need to be super detailed, but they were looking at, okay, here's our agenda. This is what we need to talk about at that meeting. Here's what we need to do. And then here's the minutes. I mean, they're really short. It's not really anything complicated, but it worked for them. Okay. The big thing that I want to see is that you're documenting what you have done, what you need to do, and that you're keeping record of it. Okay, that's what I want to see. The last thing that they include, this is just more minutes and whatnot, is they do include transmittals and requests for information. I've sort of soft-pedaled this topic a little bit in here, so let me talk a little bit about RFIs. How many of you have heard of an RFI? Okay, so a lot of you have heard of an RFI. There are going to be some instances in this project where you're going to need some data. And the way that this is true at least for the structures project, the way I have formulated the project, and this is sort of a little bit of a test, but there is a point where you're going to be doing work and you're going to go, wait a minute, I don't have everything. I need this, okay? And I formulated the project a very specific way, and hopefully everybody sees that. There's going to be a point where you need information. I'm going to make you formally request it, okay? So I'm going to have your project manager is going to develop a request for information. It's basically going to be nothing more than a letter sent, something like this, where you're going to say, ABC Engineering is requesting the following information, and then I will respond. On Blackboard, you'll see a little thing called responses to RFIs. I don't know if everybody sees that. But there are going to be responses that affect everybody, so I'm going to make sure that whatever response that I provide, I'm not just going to send it to that one group, I'm going to post it to everybody so that everybody sees what's going on, okay? Maybe, and I say maybe because it just depends on how you go about things, and some of that's going to be a little bit vague on my end on purpose, so. I see what you're saying. Not on this one particular point, not on this one. But that, I'll say two things. That doesn't mean you don't need to include that response in your report, because in your alternatives and final reports, you do include correspondence, and so these RFIs will go in there along with the responses. But just because I've answered that one RFI for the entire class doesn't mean that your group in your work progress doesn't have other generic questions that you'd like to ask. And throughout this process, I've had groups that have never submitted any, and then I've had groups that have submitted 8, or 10, or 12, something like that. Please don't pepper me with RFIs is the only thing I would say. I have no problem responding to them, but if you have like 6 questions that are related, just give me one RFI with all those questions. But usually, at least for the purposes of the class, we're talking about sort of bigger, larger picture questions, not, why is this load factor 1.25 instead of 1.2? You can ask that in class. So. Sound good? Now, just so you're aware, with this particular experience this year, it was a little different. With this year, we had a structures team. We had a geotech team. We had a transportation team. We had a hydro team. And so they were actually all working on the same project, but they were all doing different aspects of that project. So you'll find RFIs where they were, this team was submitting an RFI to that team, asking them for information that they needed. So for instance, the geotech team was asking the structures team for the reaction so that they could design the foundation for the piers and the abutments and whatnot. So that we're not going to do that in here because we're all sort of doing kind of the same thing, but that's just something to think about. And that's basically it for this report. They did include received transmittals, but this group, they didn't have anything they received that week. Now, this is example 2. And right off the bat, you can see that the report looks very, very differently. I did think that this was a pretty good name for a group. I thought that was kind of funny. Trust me. Do you get it? Like, no, we get it, Dr. Mike. We do. But so one of the things that I think this group did a very, very good job on was splitting up action items. So this was a pretty short report, or a short set of meeting agendas and minutes. So one thing right off the bat, they compiled their agenda and their minutes into one single template. Like they didn't have, okay, here's our meeting agenda and then here's our minutes in separate documents. It was all in one document. But one of the nice things I kind of like about this setup, and I think they did this a little bit better and a little bit more concisely than the previous group, is you'll see they have action items, okay? So action item, perform hand calculations for beam sizing. Who is responsible for that person? In this case, everybody's responsible. But there might be an action item where just you are responsible for, an action item for where you are responsible. So and then they also set deadlines. So this group, I think, did a really good job of assigning tasks to an individual person. And another thing I think they did, I'd say I thought this was fine. With their timesheet, what they did with their timesheet is they would just submit the same timesheet over and over again and just add on to it. So this was the timesheet at the very, very end. So what they would, like in week 2, I might get this much. And then in week 3, I would get this much. And then in week 4, I'd get, this much. They would just keep adding to it, okay? And I thought that was perfectly fine. So I'll leave you to review that to your heart's content. But like I said, what I want to see in your meeting minutes, I do want to see a letter of transmittal from your company's PM saying, okay, here's the meeting minutes. I want to see, at the very least, your agenda and minutes from your meetings, what it is you were trying to accomplish, who is responsible for what you're getting accomplished, what you need to continue to do, and I want to see your timesheets. And I know other than that, I kind of don't really want to tell you much else because this is all going to be focused around how your group decides to conduct business. It might sound, I have absolutely no problem whatsoever if you all decide to FaceTime with one another instead of actually meeting in person. I really don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem if you use any, drive sharing, file sharing service to your heart's content. You can do whatever you want. I'm really trying to keep out of how your team decides to do business. I just want to make sure you're recording the business that you're getting done. Sound good? Okay. Now, a couple things that I have posted. I have posted the specs, or posted the Astro LRFD spec. It is long, and I'm not going to go through it in here because I kind of don't want to. I want to see you all do this on your own. But if you're wondering, okay, what do I need to be doing between now and whenever we get started, you need to be getting together your team name and your PM. You need to get that figured out. You need to be getting your file sharing stuff set up. It's probably not a good idea to get letterheads, letter templates and whatnot set up. And then I would also just be researching short span bridge solutions. I would just be doing general research on, types of solutions, product availability, prices. You can do all that right now. You don't need me to do that. You don't need me to stop to do that. Yes. I was trying to come up with something a little bit smart ass, and I lost it too. But like I said, everybody in here, you can be, between now and next Friday, you can be doing research on what are the types of solutions available, for short span bridges. Are we talking about steel solutions, concrete solutions? What concrete solutions are out there? Post-tension segmental boxes? Are we talking about Astro girders? Or where would you get them? Where would you get steel products? Where would you get concrete products? How much is it going to, what prices are we talking about? This is stuff you all can be doing right now. You don't need lectures in bridge engineering to keep that moving forward. So you got plenty of work to do between now and next Friday. Yes.
So for our meeting minutes for next Wednesday, should that include this week?
Yes, yes. Yeah, if you go to, here, let me show you something real quick. If you go to Blackboard, when it says weekly meeting minutes, this is something I'm doing. So for weekly meeting minutes, submission number 1, report from the period of Monday, January 14th to Sunday, January 27th. So, and then that report is due the following Wednesday. And so that's typically how it's going to work. You're going to work from Monday to Sunday, and then that following Wednesday I get your report. And we just keep that pattern throughout the semester. I will say this, when it gets to crunch time, like report submission deadlines, I probably won't ask for meeting minutes that week. So your alternatives report, it's due on Friday, March 15th. That Wednesday, I'm not going to ask for meeting minutes because I know what you're doing. You're working on the report. So I think that would kind of be a little bit of a jerk move on my part, that you're putting together this 100-page report, but I need your meeting minutes. Really? I'm not going to do that to you. So, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. No. Any other questions? Yeah. No, not really. I mean, no, I wish I could have a better answer for you, but I really don't. Usually what I have found in this process is this is just my experience, because I've done this for a while. I come here and I tell you, don't wait until the last minute, and then the last minute comes around, and you think, well, if I wait to the last minute, it only takes a minute. No.
I had tested that my whole college career.
This will be the final test. Oh, this one's different. This one's different. Look, so in fairness, I have seen instances where the timesheets, the hours just start to rack up as you get closer to submission deadlines, and I understand that's going to happen, and it is what it is. So no, I mean, but let me tell you this: if you were submitting 4 meeting minutes in a row and you had 0 hours, I'd go, something's wrong, so yeah. Keep in mind, you do have the option later on to rank your team members. And I'm going to show you that right now, just so that you're aware. I'm going to post this later. What I'm going to do when we get closer to the deadline, I'll show you how the sheet works, but I'm actually going to insert the names for you, and you just rank them, so that when I collate the data, everybody's names are organized in the same fashion. So here, let me Let me close this real quick. Actually, no. Here we go. Team member evaluation. Okay, so if you go to course content, there's a thing called team member evaluations. So right off the bat, I did upload the rubric. So I do think that's worth looking at now. And we'll review this again. But what I'm going to do for each of your team members, let me pull up the sheet because I think this is a little more daunting than the actual sheet. Here's the sheet. So there are 6 team members in each group except for the environmental group. They have 5. What I'm going to do for each of your team members is I've asked basically a series of 9 questions. And they're pretty straightforward. So for instance, if you go to these questions, so question number 1, did this team member accept a fair share of responsibility when asked? And so if you're wondering what I'm looking for, this is what I'm looking for. So, you know, if you're giving them a 5, you'd say they're willing to take on tough assignments, willing to take the fair share versus like refusing work. Okay, so that, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, this is sort of what I'm after. Did they attend all the team meetings? Okay, well, what's a scale of 1 to 5? Well, 5 means they didn't miss any meetings. 4 would be they missed one with what would basically be considered a legitimate reason. Did they miss one with an illegitimate reason? Did they miss 2 or did they miss 3 or more? So, you know, you can rank that accordingly. And one of the things about the spreadsheet is you can sort of rank in between. So let me show you the spreadsheet. So let's say, you know, here's the spreadsheet, and team member number 1 is Billy, whoever Billy is. And then, okay, did this member accept a fair share of responsibility when asked? Well, I think I'll give them a 4. So all you do is you go into the sheet and you enter X, okay? And then it automatically determines whether or not that's a 4. Did they complete them on schedule? Not really. Did they perform their best work effort? Maybe I think that's a 3.5, so I'll just do that. And it'll rank it between accordingly. And you can use capital X's or little x's, and it figures it out. And so what you'll do is you will rank not only yourself, but you'll rank all of your team members. The only person that sees this ranking is you and me. So if you have a team member that you think isn't contributing, you have the option of telling me with just you and me knowing. So, and I don't mean for you to take this as like an effort of retribution, but you know, that's not really what I'm looking at. The way I look at it is this: if I have a group of 6 students and I see that this group put together a phenomenal report, but really only 4 of them contributed, well, I want to know because I think they deserve to get that credit. So, that makes sense? All right. One other thing at the end, there is a space for comments. So what I'll do is I do ask for you to just give me some generic comments, like if there's anything that you'd like to say or anything to clarify your answers. And then I do ask 2 questions for each person. Would you like to work with this person again on future projects? And is this person competent in the techniques taught in this course? And so they're yes or no questions. So I'm only going to ask you to do this twice, so it's not that big of a deal, but I do want you to do it. But that'll come up later. Sound good? Okay. All right. Let's talk about MathCAD. All right. How many of you that brought a computer have it installed? Hold on. Okay. Okay. So MathCAD is an incredibly simple tool, and it's really, really, really neat. Okay, so here's the MathCAD sort of layout. Let me close this little news and information thing if it decides to close. Okay, I'll leave it open. I know on my desktop it's closed, but I don't know. Maybe it's just loading or something. I don't know. Okay, right off the bat, one of the things that you'll notice is there's a cursor. You can move that cursor around with the arrows or with your mouse. And it snaps to the grid. So this looks like quad paper. It looks like quad paper for a reason because this is primarily for engineers. If you go to the document tab right here up top, so there's input, output, functions, all this stuff. If you go to the document tab where it says show grid, you can change the grid size to fine, and it gives you a little bit more freedom. I kind of prefer the fine grid. That's just me. And when you print, you can turn the grid off. So here it says show grid. You can turn it off so you don't see the grid when you print. So that's a little bit, I think, a little easier to view what's going on. Okay? Now, this layout, I think, is pretty straightforward and it's pretty easy to understand. There's the Math tab, which is the first one, which is where you're actually performing calculations. I'm going to focus a lot of my time on just doing basic computations. So a couple things that I think you need to be made aware of when you use MathCAD is the difference in the equal marks that are utilized. Okay? So let me show you something. All right? If I say x equals 2, it gets, right off the bat, it gets upset. Okay? And one of the reasons it gets upset is because I say x equals, and it goes, wait a minute, you haven't defined x. It doesn't know what x is. Okay? So the way that I would define x, so you can highlight a region and just hit delete to make it go away, is the way to define what x is you say x, and then you type a colon, like shift and then colon next to the L, and you say x equals 2. And notice how the equal sign looks different, like a colon and equals. Everybody see that? Okay, so what that is a definition. Okay? So now MathCAD understands that x equals 2. So if I say, okay, what is x plus 3, and I hit equals, it now understands, okay, you have defined 2, so now I can perform that computation x plus 3. Okay? Sound good? Okay? Yeah, you have to define your variables. Okay? And that's a good point, because that was going to be my next point. MathCAD is a top-down program, which means it starts at the top and it works its way down. So you have to define the value before you compute. If I take this definition and I move it down below this, it doesn't understand what that is because it's trying to perform x plus 3 and it doesn't know what x is because that definition is below. So if you move that up, now it understands how to do the computation. Yes? No, you can do that. You can move this, next to it, and that's fine. That's completely fine. All right. Everybody good? Okay. All right. Now, another thing is how you do a subscript. So if I want to type in like F sub Y for yield stress, what you do is F, and you do control minus, and then that's a Y. So if you ever control minus, that will be how you enter subscripts for variables. So F sub Y. And then you can say colon, and then 60 KSI. Okay? You'll know that your units are handled appropriately because units always show up blue and bold. Okay? So that'll be how you can tell if your units are handled appropriately. Okay? Now, right up here on the top where it says constants and symbols and all this, for instance, in symbols, there's all sorts of different Greek symbols that you can use. So, for instance, if we're doing, let's say, gamma sub W equals 62.4. You can do that. All right. When you're dealing with, I think, do you all talk in any of your classes about, what is it, pound force versus pound mass? Y'all talk about that, like in fluids or like LBF versus LBM? When you're looking at forces, like here's one thing I'll mention when it comes to MathCAD. Don't ever use just LB. Use LBF for pounds, okay? So for instance, here's why. So if I do 1 kip equals that many newtons, I can go in and say, well, how many LBFs is it? And it's 1,000 pounds, okay? Which that's another thing, okay? Whenever you perform a computation, you can change the units, and I'll show you that here in a second. Did you have a question? Superscript. That's like an exponent. Just the same way that you would in Excel, like above the 6. Yeah. Everybody okay with this? All right. Now, one thing that you can do is this. Okay. So let's do a basic computation. Okay. So I have an FY, and here I'm going to delete this. So I have FY is 60 KSI, and let's say an area equals, I don't know, 2.6 inches squared. Okay. Now, if I take FY times area, what's the units? Just in here, like ignore MathCAD. What would the units be? There we go, kips. Okay. So if I do FY times area, what it's doing is it's giving it to me in newtons. Okay. The reason why is because MathCAD, the way MathCAD works is it automatically converts everything to a base unit conversion system. If you look right up here on the top, it's saying that the base unit system is SI. If I were to change that to, let's say, USCS units, well, then it converts it into pounds. Okay? Let's say I don't want pounds. Let's say I want kips. What you can do is you can take this computation and then double click where it says LBF, like highlight that and say, I don't want pounds. I want kips. And bam, there's kips. Okay? And then you can go in and say, no, that wasn't 2.6, that was 3.2. And then it updates accordingly. Okay? So the nice thing about MathCAD is it displays your computations neatly and easily, that you can easily interpret this. Okay? And you can get really wild and nuts with your equations. Like later on in steel design, when you all see the limited unbraced length equations like L sub R, that is an equation. That thing is huge. But you can do this really easily in here. Yes. Yeah, it recognizes just about any unit that you'd want. Yep. At least any unit in a civil engineering context. So. A couple things. All right, so I do have a couple things I want to get through, and I don't have a whole lot of time, so I want everybody to pay attention. If you go up here to constants, there are a few built-in constants, and really the only one I think you'd really need to know is pi. So pi is automatically defined in MathCAD. You'll notice a predefined constant is bold and green. So pi is predefined. For instance, G is predefined. So, and you can see it, G is green and bolded. So anything that's predefined, E, the natural base. Operators. Okay, so there's absolute values, division, exponents, whatnot. A quick shorthand. So for instance, when you divide, so if I say 2 divided by 3, it automatically converts that into a reaction. And I do a division using a forward slash, the one that's next to the shift key. If I do a backslash, that's a root. Okay? Okay. Now, the way that the square root function works in MathCAD is you can put in like a third root or a fourth root or a fifth root. If you leave that blank, it's going to assume it's a square root. So you can just leave that blank in most computations. Let's see, what else? Oh, one thing to keep in mind, everything that I'm doing is, everything that I type is in math terms. So these are all what I would call math blocks. You can also include text blocks. So if you want to organize your document like this, like you can say, okay, here's this, and then next to this, I'd like to insert a text block, and I'd like to insert a text box and say this is yield stress of steel. So you can go in and place remarks and comments in text format next to your variables so that you're sort of defining what they are, kind of like commentary in a code. Yes? Yes, you can, but that sort of was going to be one of my last points. You got to be careful. So, for instance, for those of you that have already had concrete design, let's say you have, F sub C prime equals 4 KSI, okay? And, let's say I want to determine the modulus of rupture. So FR. Oh, R. And does anybody remember how to do that? You concrete design folks? I'll start you out. Times lambda, but we'll ignore the lambda and just say it's 1. Times what? Square root of FC prime. But what was the problem with the FC prime? You put in PSI and you get out PSI. Now, the way that you can do this for this particular equation is you can actually take this and you can multiply it by PSI, and it tells MathCAD, okay, I want that unit to be in PSI for this equation, and it spits it out accordingly. Because basically what you're doing is you're saying, okay, this is in PSI, then multiply it by a PSI, take the square root, so the answer comes out in PSI. So the short answer to your question is yes, but the long answer is yes, but you kind of need to do some testing. So for instance, with live load reduction equations, you end up having to throw in an extra foot unit in there to make everything make sense, but you can. So, sound good? Okay, let's see. A couple other things worth mentioning. So, like I said, you can include text boxes. A text block, like where you see up here, text block, that's basically if you have some text that is going to extend across the entire width of the page. So, for instance, you could do some calculations and then write a paragraph. You know, so I would say a text block is going to be more appropriate for that, but I'm not going to include that in our calculations here. Let's see, a lot of these tabs you're really not going to use other than that, because other than that, I think I've probably blown your mind away about how much this program can do and how straightforward it is. You can do matrix calculations, unless you're in a finite element exercise. You're never going to do that, I don't think, in most engineering applications. Let's see, you can do plotting, but I don't really think it's necessary. One thing I'll mention here for the math formatting and the text formatting is you can go into this math formatting tab and you can say, okay, take this, I want to turn it yellow so where it's highlighted, I want to change the number of decimal places, I want to turn it into scientific notation, I want to turn it into decimal notation. You can change the way that MathCAD is going to express a single quantity. So for instance, if you want your foot kips to just sort of be spelled out, MathCAD has a way of automatically taking certain quantities and expressing them in scientific notation. So for instance, moments, if you have a value over the 1,000, it's going to automatically spit it in scientific notation, but you might not want it in scientific notation. You might just want to see 1,000. So you can change that here. You can do the same thing in text formatting. As for calculation, I don't really think you'll need to do anything here because it automatically calculates everything in your document. As for the document, you can go in at the very top and enter in, a header. You can say, ABC Engineering, and then, put that over here on the left. And then now you have headers on all your pages. So it's pretty straightforward. And keep in mind, I am recording this, so if there's anything you missed, click everything. I think that's it. I don't really. I do have one other thing I'll show you, and that is an area. Okay, there is an option here under the document called areas. So I don't know if you can see this right here, but I have an area defined. Let me zoom this over here. Okay, so the nice thing about an area is an area, you can do some calculations and then sort of hide them. So for instance, I can take this calculation, put it, I can put it inside this area, and then when I collapse it, the calculation is actually being done, but it's not taking up space on the document. See, on a lot of your homework assignments in like concrete design and steel design, for instance, if we were doing, let's say, a transform moment of inertia, like I would show you the calculation in Excel, but if I wanted MathCAD to do the calculation, I would do it inside an area and then just sort of collapse it so that it didn't take up space, unnecessary space. So yeah. Anything that's grunt work, I usually put in an area, just repetitive stuff. So. What do you think?
How about reading Excel from there?
mean, readings. I don't.
I know if I think the input output tab, it showed that you could like read an Excel file.
You can. I'll say this. I have only done that once or twice. And to be perfectly frank, I have never saw a super duper need for that unless I was trying to create something like a document in a professional setting that I was going to be using over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, Excel and MathCAD are sort of two different programs for a reason. They display calculations differently. They're meant for different things. I'm not saying that the integration isn't there and it isn't valuable. I just don't think it's terribly necessary for our purposes. And the only times that I've ever used it is if I was trying to create this super professional, calculation for a very particular thing, let's say in bridge engineering, that I wanted to do over and over and over again. And I would put a little bit of love into it. I don't really think we need to in here. So that's not to say it's not valuable. And in professional settings, you all might be doing that. So, but does it work well? Yeah, it works well. It's just the only things you have to make sure is that files are in the same folders and things like that. So that's all I got.